Welcome to today's episode. I'm interviewing Kane, aka Iron Man, who is a Haemochromatosis client, patient and conqueror. Welcome to today's episode. Kevin, how are you?
Feeling great. How are you?
Good. I'm always good, to an extent.
You look good.
Thank you. I think it's always within though, isn't it?
Sometimes it just is what it is. You look like you've been working out.
No, I haven't. So you're being very deceived. But no, I wanted to invite you on today because we had initially started this interview. In fact, it was exactly 5 years ago. So we're 5 years down the line. And I think initially when I had met you, I was very interested in your views and your journey and your diagnosis really of haemochromatosis. So I wanted to just get you back in to chat about where you've come from in the last 5 years and what sort of routes you've been through, any changes you've made to your lifestyle and any developments that you've noticed in the world of haemochromatosis. So yeah, so it's just a general conversation, just ebbing and flowing.
Well, there's a lot there. So if we go back to the beginning, so we'll maybe go 10 years, just pre-diagnosis, I had been a reasonable level runner, used to run every day. And so I was body aware. When I stopped my running, I still had a lot of running chums and people who went to the gym and that kind of thing. And I would join in with them on occasion. So my life had taken another turn. I wasn't the sporty guy I once was, but I still like to dabble in it. It's good for mental health, all that sort of stuff, and just to get a wee bit of crack with my pals. And what was happening was very quickly I had to skip parts of the session, and that wasn't me. I was a kind of known in my friend circle as a run through walls type and get up and go. And so it was tough for me to have to go, Jesus, there's something up with me. I'm just no right. I need to take a bit extra recovery. So that was the first thing. As somebody who diarised how quick I was running, how far I was running, how I felt for 10 years, to then see the deterioration in my running times that was separate from my age and stage.
Right, so what age were you at this point?
30-ish, right, there or thereabouts. So I rubbished it as I'm just busy. I've got a lot on. I did go to the doctors and say, look, I'm a wee bit done. I think I was overthinking it. I was trying to make my case, and I think in too articulate a way. That's relevant, and I'll pick up why later on. So that deterioration continued to the point I was doing, to put it into perspective, I could run under a 4-minute mile or thereabouts. I'd run for Scotland at one point as well. Now I couldn't go out and run a 6 or a 7 or 8 minute mile. And that would have been my bread and butter. I'd have been warming up at that speed. So there's something not quite right. So I went to the doctors again, because by this point I was falling asleep and people were noticing. And maybe 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and just feeling a bit drab and not really at myself. And then my mental health was suffering a wee bit. By my standards, I'm pretty high octane, but I just wasn't feeling good. But I thought that was symptomatic of the physical stuff. I don't know which came first.
Right.
You know, that interaction between the mental and the physical. Went to the doctors, did some tests, the usual sort of stuff. You're okay. I go back again. The doctor in Kilsyth was great, by the way, an investigative type, curious sort. At the same time, it was still a number of appointments over the course of a year before I eventually went in and I said, can I level with you? I'm fucked. And he burst out laughing. And we actually had a better conversation. I think that's what I needed to say when I went in at first. I'm done, doc. Having said that, the deterioration was so much that I was at a point I could now I was at the end of my tether, so that I wasn't really interested. I just went, there's something wrong with me. It needs to get sorted. We went through a further period of 6 months of testing the ferritin, so the amount of iron that's stored in your body, and it was high. And the doctor said, come back in, we'll do that again, higher again, still going, it's going up and up and up and up and up. And then he says, I'm going to send you to hospital for a wee test. Didn't really explain it in any great detail, but a genetic test for haemochromatosis, which was interesting because I had gone in and asked about the Celtic Curse, as they call it, because there's a higher number of people in the west of Scotland and Ireland have haemochromatosis than anywhere else in the world. So I said, I've read this article and it sounds a lot like me, like Google Doc. Right? But he still had to work through his processes. And so we got there. So that was a little bit amusing and also a little bit disheartening that actually that wasn't looked at earlier. That's maybe something we can pick up in the chat. And so about a year to 18 months after those initial symptoms and me feeling worse, I got my appointment through. I went to the hospital. I was taken into a room and told nicely but quite abruptly, oh, by the way, you've got haemochromatosis. And I says, oh, but I had done it. I was a kind of scholar in that by now. And I thought, great, if you're going to roll the dice and have a condition, that's what I would have. I just want to make the point, though, if you're a haemochromatosis sufferer watching on, or for anybody else, the symptoms can be a little and often right up to liver disease and other and heart failure and death ultimately. So everywhere, so there'll be people out there that are on that scale and won't be disparaging about it as a genetic disorder. But at my age, I was well aware, well, this is reversible. I can do something about this. I already know what that treatment is. So I was skipping out. I've just been diagnosed with something that I can't pronounce, but I'm actually pleased because now I have something to hang my coat on. I'm no mad.
Aye, but you can take ownership of it as well and make those changes like you say.
Yeah, and things happened pretty quickly after that. My ferritin levels were 1100 and odd initially, normally between about 50 and 100 or even 50 and 150. That sort of level would be normal for the general population who don't absorb iron at the rate that those that have the Celtic Curse do, and can also excrete it in a way that it's not sitting on your organs and everywhere else. And I was looking good, by the way, at the time, because people kept telling me you've been on holiday, because the iron deposits were on my skin, so my pigment was shifting. And there's some good videos out there, by the way, the man who turned purple and the man who turned orange.
Oh my God.
And
save money on sunbeds.
Same, one of them was a runner as well, collapsed, didn't finish a marathon. So similar story to me, but it had got to a really serious point where his family, like, he's not finishing the marathon. He's always loved his marathons. He would never stop. And because he looked so healthy, it was generating a different kind of response from the people that we talked to about not feeling well. So you're not really getting that compassion in a way that's relatable with other disorders or people with diseases that take its toll or are symptomatic with other things like alcoholism or lifestyle issues. So it is difficult to figure out really what's going on, but certainly the haemochromatosis would exacerbate that if your lifestyle wasn't up to speed. So fast forward, I'm weeked away, I get my venesection or phlebotomy as they call it. I was on for about a year, one every 10 days to 2 weeks.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, well, you're a clinician as well as the many other things that you do, Louise, so you'll know that the blood contains a lot of great stuff, and we have a certain amount of bodies in our body for good reason. So yes, it's the only way of ridding haemochromatosis patients of iron, but it's diminishing you of all the other vitamins and minerals and essential things you need. So getting that balance right is important. So for some people it might be 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, but for me my iron was so high it was more critical to actually just bring the iron levels down and keep it. And if I was a little bit tired during that process, the end would be worth the process of that intense treatment. And for me, luckily, my iron ferritin levels came down every single time. I know that from speaking to patients and being on forums and speaking to nurses that doesn't always happen. For some, it's a bit of a roller coaster. Yeah. And they go in thinking, oh, great, I can bring my iron, but they don't come down right away. Yeah. Or they pop back up. And so I was lucky that way. I got to see that progress and I enjoyed that. The former athlete in me as well. I'm like, yes. They also described me as an aggressive loader when I had over 1100 and my instinctive reaction was like, yes. If you're I'm going to do it properly, right? So that aside, that was an interesting journey between doctors and the hospital to get the venesections. It's a bit of a postcode lottery where you get your venesections in Scotland and the UK. There are some doctors' surgeries, not many, but that will do that. in that environment. For some that works. That would be that's a dignified way of doing it for such a simple procedure, because there can be a lot of mental hurdles going into the hospital, where you park sitting around other patients, having to tell your story 2 or 3 times before you give blood. And so, if I was redesigning what a patient care approach to hemochromatosis sufferers, particularly those in the prevention space like me, who, yes, did have some liver damage, but that reversed quickly, is the hospital the best place to be going in and go through that mental hurdle all the time and all the barriers in a particularly stressed system, as well-meaning as the vast majority of people are within that setup? I would say, yeah, it could be better.
Yeah, and I think the time constraints in that as well, where you've only got an allotted time slot. I think as well when you're doing the blood donation therapy, where the blood's being redonated, if it is, then you only have a certain time span where you have to get the pint out in a 20-minute period or however long that is. And then it's like a production line, isn't it? You're in, you're out. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's a good point, because I'm O negative, so I'm a universal donor. A while ago, I used to get a wee gold card, like pre-diagnosis, to say that you can give to anybody in an accident. And that was lovely. I enjoyed that. But I can no longer donate. Look, if someone was watching this and they were looking by the letter of the law, they might say, no, there are ways and means that you can donate, getting letters from doctors. But to all intents and purposes, most people with hemochromatosis in Scotland can't donate. And the question of whether it'd be worth jumping through all the hurdles to be able to go and donate in a van in an Asda car park or somewhere else, the question is whether it'd be worth it, because then you would lose the surrounding support.
Absolutely.
And you're out with the system.
The treatment, yeah.
So you're not to watching your blood being binned. And in a clinic where there's people getting transfusions and there's maybe someone struggling, I'm lucky. I've got a few big juicy veins, so you can get in and get mine. But I had some sort of what would I call it? Not vicarious negativity, like some sort of. I couldn't help but empathise. I'm an empathetic person, so I'd be watching and taking all of that in. So that's what I mean about the load and the toil that's maybe a little bit unnecessary. And we're taking up time and space in that place that maybe. There could be a more efficient and certainly more dignified way of doing it. But yes, that ownership of I have a condition and my blood's going to good use would feel great, because there was nothing up actually as a universal donor. I'm watching pints, whole humans worth of blood I've donated in recent years gone. I understand the rules are that if you're getting any kind of treatment that it's blood related, that they just bin it, and I can see why, given the history in Scotland and the UK of contaminations and everything else. So I do understand it. I can hold that thought in my head at the same time. That said, it's not beyond the wit, I think, of a fully fledged system to come up with a way of ensuring that that there's a good use for the blood, and maybe take inspiration from other countries that do that. So there is precedent there. It's not like a pie in the sky idea. Australia, many states in the USA can do that, and free of contamination, because the system's set up in such a way that it enables them to do that. Yeah,
and there's always developments in technologies as well, advancements in research and science as well. So it's not to say that it won't come to the UK, but I think you're right with what you're saying regarding that. It's always better to be safe, isn't it?
No, absolutely. That needs to be a line in the sand. That's the priority. When people are interacting with the system, they want to interact with the health system, particularly with confidence. And so that was a musing that I had. It's not something I would die in a ditch over, but it seems to me that there are opportunities there for blood donation to be better served by a group of people who have a condition and have something to contribute. And go away with a wee spring in your step, because it's nice to be able to know that you've helped somebody as well.
Absolutely. So along the timeline of that year then, that you were having sort of every 10 days a venesection, and you got it down to what kind of level was your discharge then that you were on maintenance?
Another good question, thank you. The levels, so at that time, for me, we'll talk about me first and foremost.
No, let's not talk about you.
Let's talk about wee Jerry that was in Sucky Hall Street there, and he asked us if we fancied a wee coffee. He's not got haemochromatosis, by the way.
He's got a good tan, but
he's swell. He's dubious tan. He's too much, that guy. So 50 is the 50 is the benchmark. Generally speaking, most clinicians, doctors, haemochromatosis societies the world over will have it kicking around there. They know that from patient surveys. They know that from the science. However, within that, there's areas of grey. And for me, so under 50 was absolutely correct. My joints weren't as sore. I was able to run, not to my previous standard because I'm not training as much, but I wasn't feeling deathly tired. I could train with my pals. I can now go back to the gym. So my quality of life has vastly improved coming down to 50. Coming into COVID, different scenario. Wards were shut. Communication wasn't great. And the health service stepped in to supporting those in the most need. So I completely understand that. For me, on a prevention footing, who needs to keep your iron levels down, and the only way to do it is to give blood safely, that meant that my iron levels would increase. And they did. And that was unfortunate. And I wasn't alone. And so for some, that would have been really terrifying, particularly in a world where everything was really scary around that point in time. Mm-hmm. And so I did give blood occasionally privately, so that was lovely. Louise, thank you. I don't know who this is going to land with, this podcast and what they know about you, but that's a skill that you have. I feel like I'm turning into the interviewer here. Is there anything that you want to say
Continue.
About that? Okay,
No.
So that was fantastic. That was a mobile phlebotomist. Great. And I had all the conflict of, I'm a big believer in the public health service and can't stand public money being turned private and everything else, but actually when it's your health, and I can't get to the ward anymore, I'm not being communicated with, I know that my iron levels have been described as an aggressive loader, been told by my doctors, come back if you've got symptoms. But that's not the point. I've been diagnosed and my treatment is about prevention and maintenance. And so I know I have to sit there and feel guilty as well, because you feel like you're putting a hand up for a wee and saying, what about me? When people were traumatised through COVID-19 and other bits of the system were suffering, and there was a rush to support those who had cancers and other serious ailments. So absolutely needed supported. I could empathise with that.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a failing. Right. So I'm saying, so I've got a year's worth of, I now have to know that my results, I know I'm getting tired. Quality of life matters. So my organs might not be failing, but my quality of life is suffering after working hard to get to that point. That was a real shame.
Yeah.
And if not for the access, my point about the public and the private, paying some money to have that avenue actually was a necessity for me.
Well, I guess like you're saying about the prevention, because ultimately then what all the hard work that you've been into, making sure you're attending, making sure you're in maintenance, even if there's any lifestyle changes that you've made in your diet and things, maybe not consuming alcohol, for it to get to a stage where you're effectively loading iron again aggressively, like you said, where does that lead to and when does that stop? Especially because we didn't know when the services were going to reopen again. So what was the point then where you decided that you had to go private for that? What was your your trigger there?
The amount that I was needing to sleep, which reminded me of how I felt pre-diagnosis. I was asked that question and that's how I answered it, because it was true. I will answer that question in the same way every time, because I felt exactly how I felt pre-diagnosis, and I didn't like the way I felt, and I have a young daughter, and I needed to be there for her, and I needed to be on it and present, and I wasn't present. I'm called upon to say things and speak to things in my working life. I was a bit scatty, and my brain wasn't functioning as well, which was also a pre-diagnosis symptom, by the way. I was finding my short-term memory not quite as good, and it being a little bit frustrating, where it'd be in scenarios like this, where I'd be asked a question and then get little kind of almost amnesia style lost the train of thought. Where I am someone who does intrusions and likes to go round, but I would always come back.
To answer the question,
right?
Yeah.
But I wasn't coming back. It was just out there. And then that feeds in under confidence in you as a person. And so that was the trigger. So it was part physical and part mental. And I went to the the doctors, which is, that was getting seen. We were doing more, there was Zoom and Teams and everything else. That was great. I mean, there's some positives of that to come out off the back end, but nothing beats seeing a human being sitting in front of you. And it was difficult to get any feedback from the doctors, because the doctors would say, well, that's for your clinician, that's your treatment over there in that part of the system. We can't make that decision. That's for your consultant. Have you spoken to your consultant? No, I haven't spoken to my consultant. Well, you must be due a venesection. Oh, I think the ward's closed. What do you mean you think the ward's closed? I said, well, because they've not communicated with me when I can't get through on the number, and I'm getting a kind of, you can't get seen but ambiguous reply to that question about whether the ward's closed. It turns out the ward question, I don't need to name it, but was closed for the vast majority of patients. They would say it wasn't closed because they were seeing people that were in very serious need.
Right, so
but for me, that was a bit duplicitous, even if it wasn't designed that way. As for me hearing that, I was like, no, well, the impact on me is that it's closed. Because I was being seen once every 3-4 months, and now it's over a year and I haven't been seen. I think it was almost 2 years, it was like a year and a half. And even at that point, the goalpost moved. So you asked me the question about the ferritin levels, where's your kind of sweet spot, maintenance, around 50. The goalpost moved, and we were told it's now 100. Might not seem much, and I know that out there in the doctor world, there are some that say, somewhere between 50 and 150, you'll be okay. But I knew from experience that 50 was where I was at, and I knew that anything over 100, I was well over 100 by this point, by the way, anyway, wasn't good for me. So it's difficult then to come back into a system. I know it's been disrupted, and it felt like a bit opportunistic to then change what was maintenance, the industry standard. You go on Haemochromatosis Society website, it's what they say. You can Google that, it'll come up. To then be told, no, the consultant's happy with 110. I mean, to be disparaging about the consultant, they're separate from the work on the ground and have a lot of patience, and they're just very data-led.
Yeah, but they're also very specialist in what they're saying, and they know what to look out for. But ultimately, you as the patient and as the person who's been directly affected by it, you can only go by guidelines so much, but you have to go on your limitations of your health and how you know that your health's effectively changing, that you're being triggered, or you're not living a good quality of life, like you say. So at what point does that become a priority then for the consultants or for the services that are supposed to be there to help you if you're not considered a priority?
Yes, and it's a disempowering situation anyway, because it's a small group of people that you're relying on for your healthcare, and you want to trust them. And if you pipe up too much, you don't want to get shot at, even in an inadvertent way. There was never any malice in the system, but it didn't always pay to speak up, or it felt like you were being confrontational or argumentative, when more so when the system was as stretched as it was. And I'll be as glib about this. I had a meeting recently, and the consultant or someone linked to the consultant said, so the consultant's happy. I was 109 or something. The consultant's happy with that. And when to move on, I just went, I'm glad the consultant's happy with it. I'm glad someone's happy with it, but I'm not. So I'm feeling quite good because I'm speaking up for myself. It's the advice I would give to other people. I advocate for other people, and quite often when it comes to medicine and all this, and we don't pipe up for ourselves. And I had been guilty of that as well, which compounded the problem a little bit. And then we got into a discussion. I was like, look, if you go through these patient surveys, it's like where thousands of haemochromatosis patients will say, under 100, under 50, it's the industry standard. I don't like to feel like this guy that's telling you how to do your job, but I'm the patient. If you're asking me how I am, I know that I've got a spring in my step at 50, and that my brain's clearer, that I'm less agitated, that I just feel good. I can even consume food, and how I process that functions better. It's these these signs that you only know if you become so body aware, and when you're going through treatment you get even more body aware. And so that discussion opened up into, okay, we'll go 3 monthly rather than four monthly, if every 4 months for a venesection. And I was there yesterday, so I've got my wee stabby mark at 3 o'clock, and I'm probably not quite replenished yet. So that was apt timing. That was convenient that you asked us to come in today. I know, I was kind of wanting to have a bandage on.
Or round your head.
Aye. Iron Man, after all, we're all superheroes. So yes, I came out of that and got something out of it, to be fair, because the consultant can only know what they see and what they hear. And if I had been petulant about that and not as direct, or just walked away, as I have done many times, and I had to say, look, but I've asked for every 3 months. That was pre-COVID. That was working well. I'd got down to that, and I'm not quite there yet. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to be a doctor to know. And I know how I feel, and it's 50 for a reason. It's not like it's pie in the sky. There's evidence that shows us that for the vast majority in that range is healthier. And I feel that the goalpost moved because the system was so stretched, and it was just easier to have me in every 4 months and every 3 months. Yeah. I think there's just a reality to that. But we got there, and I'm now every 3 months. As of yesterday, every 3 months. But when I got the initial door closed on me, or miscommunication or non-communication, I should have piped up at the time. But it's easier said than done when you've got 7 days in a week and you're doing lots of stuff, and maybe the advocacy and the support and the understanding of haemochromatosis, if that was better, then you'd be more inclined to feel empowered to ask the questions and speak up, rather than feel like this sort of a lowly part of the system, this sort of loitering on the fringes that should be grateful for the venisections that you do get.
Definitely. So what kind of things did you have to implement in your life then when you had been given that diagnosis? So firstly, obviously, about your diagnosis, you went through a series of tests, and then they were measuring your ferritin, which was increasing. Then they done, was it the genetic test that you had then at the hospital?
Yes.
So kind of talk me through that stage of things then. Was there any family history or anything that had been investigated previously around that?
Do you know, again, good question, because if you hadn't answered the question, you hadn't asked that question, I would never have been able to think about some of the family stuff. And there's a few things that are popping into my head. So I've got there's been some family members who've died young, who've had some heart complications, including dying in their 40s. And my dad died at 54. He was an alcoholic, but he was undiagnosed. We know that he would have had copies of the gene, because here I am.
So what was your strain of it then? What was your sort of genetic diagnosis? Did you have both of the genes, or?
Yeah, both.
Right.
Yeah, both from my mum and my dad. But the question on the family situation is that there's some congenital heart disease, and there were some specific defects. So I then got tested by a consultant who had seen my uncle 25 years previous. A really great consultant. He always had my uncle up as a bit of a friend, and almost like a poster child. You know, people that are really just into their role and invested in what they're doing. Yeah. So all those years later, he was like, all right, curb your enthusiasm that I might be related, right? We've not done the test yet, right? So I never had the genetic defect that my uncle had, and that was useful, because then it's opened me into a space that I might have done, or now I know, because there was always that little bit of worry in my family. They just keep dropping down dead and having heart conditions and congenital heart defects. So they were able to rule out some stuff that if I hadn't had that diagnosis, I would never have known. And so that's useful and helpful. And I was then able to speak to some of my dad's family, well, my whole family, my dad's family in particular, to message around and say, look, you want to go and get tested. I know that one of my cousins, I'm trying my best not to name names, I know they wouldn't mind, but they haven't given their consent. So my cousin goes to the Royal Infirmary, and I only found this out. I went to a christening, a family event, and we go, and I was talking to her, and she says, I've got haemochromatosis, and she said it was because she'd been symptomatic and she'd be diagnosed. And then, but I'm also saying to her, I was like, but you know, remember I got diagnosed 5 years previous, and I said to you, you loons, get yourself seen. But look, the end product is the fact that she has been seen and she's in maintenance as well, and that's lovely. But this is cousins, so you can see that there's a family propensity for this, and so awareness on that point again is crucial, to have that knowledge and understanding and push and go back to your doctor and be saying about these things, and also that it's community driven, postcode driven, west of Scotland. And not write things off as maybe being symptomatic of lifestyle, which can sometimes be a bit classist in nature as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're trying to access the system, or that's because of your fried breakfast, or that's because of your Guinness. On your question, I don't drink Guinness. adjustments that I made during that time. I accepted that I would never be able to run at the level I could before, so that was actually nice. So I did some weight training instead. So I just found something else that I could do, and I thought I'll just get strong. And I bought an Ironman suit and did some fundraising because that's a gift, isn't it? And my daughter, until she realises that I'm maybe a bit gone. For now, she thinks I'm great. She's 6. She's like, my dad's Iron Man. I'm like, I'm watching Incredibles, and like actually, she's not watching it, and I'm watching Mr. Incredible. I'm like, well, he's the man. So, and the diet, I read some more books. I did some more sleuthing on the internet. I joined more groups on Facebook and the likes of that. Did some reading, soaked up what's going on for people to get a feel. I didn't go head over heels into it, because that's just how the way I deal with things as well. I've got multiple things happening in my life, and it was important for me just to crack on. But knowledge is power, and so there are subtle things, like I know that drinking orange juice with your food as a haemochromatosis sufferer increases the absorption of iron in an exponential kind of way that some other foods and drinks, when they interact, don't. And so if I can help it, as much as I like orange juice, I'll have apple juice instead.
Yeah, because I think it's the vitamin C, isn't it, that helps to facilitate the absorption of the iron.
Yes, exactly that. So, and where I would have enjoyed some Guinness before, I'll just have a different drink. I still drink to excess on occasion, if I'm honest, but I manage it in a different way. Almost like I have my release valve weekend written in every few months, or 4 or 5 months or something like that, a couple of times a year. I'm just going to cut loose. But the advice you would give anybody is just more weighty advice that you would give to a haemochromatosis patient, because there is only so much you can do about regulating your iron just due to the genetic defect. But it would be clever to take account of your diet. And
yeah, well, I think that it would be good to take account of your diet regardless if you have this condition or not, just to make sure that you're aware of things that agree with you and things that don't. But essentially, I think it's very important for people to be committed to their health with diagnoses like these, because there's things that you can do to alleviate, like you're saying about the orange juice and about vitamin C, alcohol as well, because if you're maybe not being seen as often as every 3 months, every 4 months even, then I think that can be added with the certain foods that you're having. So things that like maybe processed foods as well, that are high in sort of fortified vitamins and iron, that your body's processing that, but where is it going? So it's only just going to deposit in things like your organs, or make you feel sluggish and tired, so you can combat that to reduce that before you have regular venesection for maintenance. But one thing I just wanted to touch upon was, I know you'd mentioned about you're obviously based in Glasgow. I won't mention any of the hospitals or services, but one of the health board areas, I think it's Lanarkshire. Don't know if you'd heard about that. There was a report in the Herald newspaper. I know you're familiar with the Herald, but it was a report in the Herald newspaper that some of the local haemochromatosis patients had come together. They had contacted the Haemochromatosis Society because the health board had decided that they would change the levels from 50 to 1,000. Not 100, 1,000. Don't know if you heard about that.
I heard about all of that, other than the crucial detail there. I thought you were going to say 100. And I don't mind putting it out there in the spirit of honesty and helping other people, but I was NHS Lanarkshire. And so a prelude to a lot of that was that there was cultural and system change that hadn't been communicated. And that's so I suspect that the stuff that's come after, and those group of haemochromatosis who've got together, brilliant, because you need that collective action for people to listen. What has been part of that shift before it was maybe formalised. So they've responded to that situation when it had already been in practice for a period prior. You know, that would maybe embed something before you announce this is what we're doing. But that's pretty shocking, actually. I actually don't know how to respond to that, because because 1,000's wild. If you type in ferritin 1,000 to Google, I've done it, because remember I had when I was 1100, right? It says seek help. It says you're at risk of a heart attack. What are you doing on Google? So well done that the group of people are all together. Do you know what the result of that was? I've now been seeing somewhere else, by the way.
Right.
Just,
Yeah, so I think the result was, I'm sure this was 2022. Yeah, it wasn't last year, it was the year before. Can't remember exactly the date or anything, but I'm sure it was that year, because it was people that I knew, and they'd come together, and I think they had contacted Haemochromatosis Society as well, who got involved in this and backing up the patients, really, to say this is not acceptable. Some of them, because they were of the sort of older demographic, they had been told that new diagnoses were being prioritised. So, to answer your question, I don't know where it's ended for those people, or if they're being seen. I know certainly some of them who are maybe more vulnerable have been transported elsewhere, so they've been sent to, I don't know if it'd be Lanarkshire, it'd be more sort of Glasgow, but they've been redirected to other hospitals that do have more of a facility to see them and to give them the treatment that they need. Not all of them, though. Not all of them.
I was aware of that redirection, and I've been part of that redirection path, which of course then puts pressure on other bits of the system in those other areas, in hospitals as well. So that's not a great approach, like a system approach going forward, really, is it? It might fix little bits that's symptomatic of some failings. No, I hope that gets sorted, and I will be having a wee interested read and think about that as well, and maybe how I can lend my voice and time to be part of that collective action, just to ensure that there isn't a domino effect to that and that becomes the norm. It reminded me of a conversation I had with a clinician when I've been having discussions like this, to say, well, remember COVID and everything else, this thing about feeling guilty again, about kind of making you putting it back on the onus on you to go, maybe you don't need to see me, as that she said, oh, but that's the gold standard. And I was like, no, don't be fooled. That's not the gold. Having a hierarchy of need, or because you're 65 plus, they don't make way for 20-year-olds. That's the whole principle of universal healthcare. And we can't, if we fragment from too much and we have us all vying for bits of it, then we'll have divided and conquered and divvied up the whole system till it's impossible to retreat to a place that people have a common understanding, basic standard. So the basic standard is not the gold standard. It's just like the goalposts have moved, but what is and what is not the gold standard. And that's certainly pretty galling to hear that happened. And well done, the UK Haemochromatosis Society for backing that. I do think in Scotland, given there's such a high number of patients with and people who are undiagnosed, or people who are diagnosed at post-mortem, that Scotland, given that the NHS, to all intents and purposes, we're an independent country when it comes to medicine and healthcare. We could, we wait and see how much money they get, fine. But at that point, the distribution and how all that works is for the Scottish system, the local authority system, and we have a parliament that deals with this. They've got lawmakers, policymakers, politicians in there, where I feel that the Scottish context would be better served by a Scottish group who unashamedly every day of the week focused on the issues related to Scotland, but do that in a way that works alongside the UK Haemochromatosis Society as an ally, as a friend, to build coalitions. So if I'm sitting in UK Haemochromatosis Society's position, it actually is difficult because they're working within multiple contexts across the whole UK.
Absolutely.
And I would see that as a friendly offer rather than a threatening offer. When you're part of the structures and you've got a charity, I can see why a bit of you'd be conflicted and maybe react defensively to those kind of suggestions. But actually, the people who know the system best, because it is a different system, and that's okay to be different. are the people, the clinicians, everybody. If we had a body that could unite and get the doctors, the consultants, the patients round the table and go, well, what is our next step for policy influencing? What's our next step for parliamentary influencing? How much training do doctors need? When do we get tested? So UK Haemochromatosis Society have done a great thing where they'll send out the testing kits.
Yeah, I've seen that.
That's good, but again, for me, it's tinkering. It's symptomatic of a failing. You're going to give out the testing kits. Actually, if we had some sort of Haemochromatosis 101 in Scotland, where we were just getting tested as part of the NHS, as part of that gold standard, that basic standard, then we wouldn't need to be relying on that. Yes, it complements the system, but I actually feel that if there'd be a way to approach it that...
Yeah, you can screen in advance then before it gets to the symptomatic stage.
That's what I'm driving at.
Yeah. And I think as well, like you're saying about the Haemochromatosis Society is a great thing. I'm sure that they're based in England, that's where the sort of office is based, even though they are a nationwide, so they serve all the sort of UK and Northern Ireland. But like you say, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because you've got the England demographic where there's one in so many that will be diagnosed with this. You'll have the Welsh, you'll have the Scottish, and you'll have the Northern Irish. So as much as, for example, the Lanarkshire Health Board example of leaving the value of ferritin to over 1,000 before they'll be considered a priority, and you have this sort of charity that's based in England that's probably, as much as they're a nationwide sort of charity serving all of these nations within the UK, they're backing up the Scottish people who are saying, no, we need this level to be lower so that we can be treated and be taken seriously, that our symptoms here they need to be, what's the word I'm looking for? They need to be honoured. But the other side of the sword with that is the Scottish consultants, the Scottish health boards, the services, the local authorities are only going with the guidelines within the parameters of what they can do. Yeah. So it's more of it is fragmented, because you have a sort of government policy that's not really reflecting the needs of the health authority. Yeah. So it's more about politics and about budget rather than about health.
Yes. Aye. No, a good point, very well made. And yes, and you've touched on just how disjointed all of that is. And when you look across the world, we don't need to look that far. The Irish Haemochromatosis Society will be operating within their budgetary constraints, within their political landscape, within their policy context, and still work very well with the UK Haemochromatosis Society, trading ideas, to going to events, learning from one another. And then, of course, there's the wider support of infrastructure, because I'm well aware that there's volunteers who work for UK Haemochromatosis Society and in the health system as a whole, particularly voluntary health. And that industry, that network sector, third sector as well, have suffered incredibly. They worked really hard, doing more for less, harder to get and retain and train volunteers and people to do the whole family support, to be the community liaisons, all the sort of stuff that would help alleviate stress on the system when it's at that symptomatic clinical stage. And so I think that discussion would need to happen alongside that's investment in the whole infrastructure. And go back to the original point, some targeted look at how doctors and nurses, the training of that, the legislation that attaches to it in Scotland, where can movement be made, where you could bring people together like they've done in North Lanarkshire, rather than reacting to something, but actually get together as a collective in a more proactive way to have an MSP speaking up on your behalf. So UK Haemochromatosis Society have done that brilliantly, particularly in Westminster. And I think maybe just to illustrate your point, sometimes it's about the fragmented nature of it, and the unfortunate and also fortunate position that UK Haemochromatosis Society are in is that they had an event and described it as a UK event, and it was about something very specific to do with Westminster, but actually didn't relate to Scotland. So it ended at the border, really, in terms of what they were talking about, but the way it was communicated was a UK-wide thing. That comes with a bit of skill and time in the job, and I wouldn't expect someone in that context to understand completely, because they would have to spend a lot of time and take them away from their core purpose, every bit of the Scottish context. That's just the nature of being a UK-wide beast. But it highlights where it's not only a struggle then, or more of a challenge in Scotland, it can be challenging as well then for a group of people who are based in England and framed around a particular system to behave in a way that suits everyone all the time. And that's just, it can't possibly be done. So I wasn't churlish about that, and I noticed the subtlety of communication around things, and that it wasn't a deliberate attempt to marginalise Scotland. But as a Scot, it meant nothing to me. As a haemochromatosis patient in like we've said, a devolved environment,
yes,
it just needed either a tweak in the communication or a commitment to, and by the way, we'll do that in the Scottish Parliament as well, in the Holyrood. And that, again, who do they speak to? And that, but there's the network of people that are relying on goodwill in Scotland,
yes,
rather than a structural body like they're doing, an equivalent, a sister organisation, or looking at, well, what is the specific thing that's needed in Scotland? It might not be all of that. It may be a partner organisation that's related to that organisation that actually stands alone and said, we're going to spend the next 3 years looking at the Parliament structures and the NHS, and what do we need to do for haemochromatosis patients and the interaction with all the different parts of the system to make it better.
Yeah, because I think, like, just to kind of briefly kind of finish on that, I think it's looking at the fact that it's, as much as it's a nationwide charity, it is a charity, and it's a charity registered in England, which usually means that the budget would, not always, but the budget would be dispersed in that region, where the occurrence of a haemochromatosis diagnosis is not as frequent as in Scotland or Northern Ireland. So I think it's that, like, obviously the budget's going to be spent more or less in that region, even though resource is great, education's great, you know, they have the online presence, but what can they really do? How can they really reach out to people within those other parts of the UK that have a higher frequency of diagnosis of haemochromatosis, that it's needed more? So you've got this sort of resource, and you've got the education, that's great, you've got the support, the forums, you've got all the information there, but people need treatment. So what happens in that? There's like a break there.
It comes back to need. You've summarised that really well. So if you look at it globally, the west of Scotland and Ireland have the highest proportion of haemochromatosis carriers in the world, and that's just the ones that we know. Like, so there'll be people diagnosed, people undiagnosed, people will have come and gone and unfortunately not been diagnosed. And so if it was any other ailment, if you were looking at it globally, and there was something very unique to a particular country, you would expect that the support was commensurate with that need. I suppose what we're saying is it's not commensurate with the need at the minute. We're not even touching the sides, and given how so many people that are impacted by it, the knowledge, understanding and action being taken is threadbare and needs to be better. But absolutely, I think what we're saying is the people that are doing good stuff are doing great stuff, as they always are in the system, regardless of where they are in the UK, or whether they're part of a charity, or whether they're just a flag bearer for information provision and promotion. We can, yes, that's a given to me. And do you know, if there was more days in the week, I've thought about it, and I'm going, between all the different things, fundraising and everything else, and I now know I've got a whole network of you and I. There's loads of people that could come together, be really powerful. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I think just maybe let this be the precursor to follow up discussions with partners, and making new friends and building more alliances, and then coming up with something that we can actually do together to benefit the people of Scotland.
Yeah. Excellent. Right, okay. So kind of what would be your take home, or your output, your message to people who maybe feel that they have symptoms that you mentioned before, tiredness, sluggishness, joint pain, sleeping more, not sleeping enough? Like, what would be your sort of advice for someone who feels that they would like to be tested and they're not getting anywhere with their GP?
First thing I would say is if they are going to their GP, is to actually say hemochromatosis. I think it's unfortunate that it's quite a mouthful, and unless you've been diagnosed and in a normalised environment where saying hemochromatosis is kind of the norm, that's actually not an easy thing to remember. Oh, I've got, so speak up. Please do, be bold. I know it's tough, and it's not always easy to champion your own cause yourself, but please do it. I think the way to do that is to say the words. Doctors want to hear the words, and they then have the information to decide whether they're going to follow up on your concerns. And if they don't, go back. And if they don't go back, we know from the system, in all parts of the system, whether it's health, housing, anything you do, unfortunate, it's the way it is. You just need to keep nudging. So keep nudging, say hemochromatosis, do some reading, share the articles if you're on social media, talk about it to friends, normalise the notion, the concept, the understanding that there's this significant, prevalent genetic disorder, and that no one's impervious to its effects. So that would be my first thing. Second thing, if it's family and friends, speak up. There's going to be a thread that runs through this. Speak to your friends, your family. Pause, listen to them, go back if they've not been and got tested, and say to them, can you please do this? Mm-hmm. To refer them to podcasts like this one, to share around information about the societies, and do simple things like say to them to Google it, send something in WhatsApp. Very basic things, as is often the case. Mm-hmm. would be my message. And lastly, don't wait. Just don't wait. But that's please, because we're a tough bunch, I think, up in Scotland, particularly the west of Scotland, and we know that people wait too long. If you get diagnosed with haemochromatosis and you're early enough, you can reverse some symptoms, like for myself with that liver, some impacts on my liver. It's now reversed. You can maintain a quality of life and your mortality rate be exactly the same as it was had you no genetic disorder. I think that point's really, really important, that early diagnosis is key. 6 months, year could be too late. So don't fall into that tragic bracket, please. Go and get seen and speak up.
Magic. Thank you very much. It was lovely to speak to you. Really appreciate that today.
No probs. Enjoyed it.
And I'm sure we'll be working on something in the future.
Aye, let's do it. And next time, let me know if I'm going on screen, please.
What do you mean?
I thought I had my radio face on the day I was
Well, you're looking quite tanned, so.
I know.